Recently, 3 members of Japan's House of Representatives from the conservative Liberal Democratic Party came to Korea with the aim to visit the Dokdo Islands. They were refused entry and put on a political show for 9 hours before they returned to Japan. Later on, Japanese government complained about the refusal of entry through the Japanese embassy in Seoul. The next day, the Japanese government once again raised controversy by releasing a defense white paper claiming that Dokdo belonged to Japan. As Japan keeps trying to assert its claims over the Dokdo Islands, the United States also caused controversy in the seas. A U.S. agency officially advised the International Hydrographic Organization to name the body of water between Korea and Japan Sea of Japan instead of East Sea as asserted by Korea. 66 years have passed since Korea's independence from Japanese rule, and the Korea-Japan relationship seems to be taking a turn for the worse. Why do the controversies continue, and how should we seek to resolve the standing issues? We discuss these questions and the present state of Korea-Japan relations on today's episode of In Focus.
Come August 15th, Korea will celebrate the 66th anniversary of independence from Japanese colonial rule. The recovery of sovereignty was a historic triumph, ending 36 years of colonial rule. Since then, the two countries have had a mixed relationship of increasing economic partnership and continuing historical antagonism. The biggest standing issue between the two has been the territorial dispute over the Dokdo islets. Recently, there have been flare-ups with Japan asserting its claim over the islets and the U.S. throwing support behind naming the East Sea as Sea of Japan. Join our experts as they discuss these standing issues in the Korea-Japan relationship. Welcome to all our viewers in Korea and around the world. I am Jae Chung Kim. Once again, Dokdo Island has become a hot potato between Korea and Japan, and the relationship between the two countries has become sour as we approach the National Independence Day. To discuss the impending issues between Korea and Japan and to talk about much more, we invited 2 experts to our studio today. Welcome to the program, Dr. Choi and Professor Lee. Okay, on August 15th, Korea will be celebrating the 66th anniversary of national independence from Japanese colonial rule. Yeah. It seems that not many viewers outside Korea are really familiar with Korea's national independence day and the history behind it. Could you talk a little bit about the historical background of our national independence day and what it means to Koreans?
Yeah. August 15th, 1945. Is the day that Japan made the unconditional surrender to the Allied powers in the Second World War. So August 15th is the day Japan is lost in the war. And then 1948, August 15th, Korean government, official government is established on the same day in 3 years. And 1949, the government assigned the same day of August 15th as the celebrating day for our independence from the Japanese colonial rule. So in the history, Japan made the illegal annexation of the Korea in 1910, and the war is over in 1945. So we say that it was colonial rule of 36 years. So for Koreans' perspective, after the Joseon dynasty, we lost our sovereignty over this Korean peninsula to Japan, and then we recovered it on the August 15th and independence from that. So this would be the one of the most glorious day for Koreans, and these days we are pretty much succeeding in the world politics, in the world economy. So this is made possible because we made independence on August 15th, 66 years ago.
I guess because of a string of unfortunate events that transpired between Japan and Korea, the meaning of this anniversary looks much more significant to Koreans. Well, what does this anniversary mean to South Korea?
Well, just to add up, I think it's very significant. But in a way, it's unfortunate that 66 years have passed since our independence, and yet the emotional reconciliation still has not taken place. I think that's the unfortunate aspect of the bilateral relations. When we look back to the colonial period, our memory of the colonial period is not a positive one. It's a negative one. We were forced to worship Shintoism. We were forced to change our surnames to Japanese. We were forced to speak Japanese language. So what Japan tried to do during the nearly 4 decades of their rule here in Korea was to basically kill off our culture, so cultural genocide. And therefore, this being a very Confucian-oriented society, that attempt by Japan, our neighbor, was not taken well by the Koreans back then. And we also have to keep in mind that although we were annexed in 1910, we were declared a protectorate of Japan since 1905. So it's actually over 4 decades when we're talking about Japanese direct rule over Korea. Of course, the colonization and annexation basically means that Korea no longer exists officially. We're part of Japan. And therefore, in 1945, when we became independent as a result of the Japanese defeat in World War II, this came as a tremendous exhilaration and happiness for the Korean people who suffer from the Japanese tyranny. There are a lot of things that's very positive going on after 66 years, culturally, economically, and even politically. I would say that the two countries have come a long way in improving relations between the two countries and the two peoples. And yet, here and there are sporadic incidents, especially over things like the Dokdo Island, the textbook issues, which really, we make such an advancement and progress, and then these things flare up, and it pulls our ankles back.
Purposely, yes. Yes. Speaking of those unfortunate events, recently 3 lawmakers from Japan tried to visit the Dokdo Island, but the attempt was frustrated by the South Korean government. Nonetheless, it created a big stir, both in Korea and Japan. So can you walk us through what exactly happened here?
Well, there are 3 Japanese lawmakers, diet men, who tried to make a statement, I suppose, by visiting Ulleungdo, which of course is the parent island of Dokdo. And their purpose was basically to go to Ulleungdo and somehow investigate, according to them, and try to trace the history of Dokdo and its link with Ulleungdo. Of course, probably in the end, trying to deny the relationship, and maybe trying to link Dokdo, what they call Takeshima, more with the history of Okinoshima, of the Shimane prefecture. So the attempt is very clear. They're trying to deny the territorial sovereignty of South Korea over Dokdo. This is not a new issue. I mean, it's been there. Things flared up in the mid part of the 1950s. There were actually some minor naval clashes, which led to, at that time, President Syngman Rhee deciding to station permanently Korean security forces over Dokdo. So we have been, for the past several decades, physically possessing Dokdo Island, which is a very important precedent for international law in terms of your territorial claims. So, of course, Japan, which has not denied its claim over Takeshima, will, every opportunity that it gets, to counter Korea's claim. And we've not seen the last of this. So I think what's important is that we should continue to make sure that our claim has good foundations legally, We physically possess it, which is a tremendous advantage over the Japanese. But at the same time, don't make this flare up so much that, in fact, I think the three lawmakers from Japan got too much publicity.
Dr. Che, a lot of critics in Korea are saying that, well, these three Japanese lawmakers are politically insignificant figures in Japan, and they are trying to pull off these political stunts to advance their own political gains. So the Korean government should have just let them visit the Dokdo Island. It was not a big deal. But by overreacting to these political stunts, the Korean government did a favor to these lawmakers. What do you think about this critic?
Yeah, those three lawmakers, as you said, is not much well known in Japan's political arena, and those conservatives aimed at to their sovereignty over the Dokdo Island to spread to Japanese people. Until 2005. Not many Japanese knew that. They didn't have an interest about that. The only territories they thought about is the Senkaku Islands and the Northern Territories. Japan was out of their interest. But since then, those politicians and history books made kind of events in Japan. And that's why Japanese people, more people getting more interest about that. And then even the textbooks, spreading to middle school textbooks. Textbooks says that Dokdo Island is remaining as it is. So what those conservatives intend to do that is that finally they want to bring that question to the International Court of Justice. So they make it a kind of international problem. So, but as he said, because Korean is physically and legally and historically, we have a sovereignty over that island. So because of that, sometimes we need to be a little bit careful, or we need to be more strategic, and we do the policies based upon the long-term perspectives.
Maybe we can talk a little bit more about Korea's policy responses to Japanese provocations. Right after Japanese lawmakers tried to visit the Dokdo Island, the Japanese government released its defense white paper, which claims that the Dokdo is a part of their territory. How significant was this announcement?
We can say that there are three set menus in Japan to provoke the history problems. The first one is textbook. The second one is the defense white paper. The third one is the diplomacy blue book. So those three government issues, well, in the case of textbooks, it is authorized by the government. But three things make provocations about just sovereignty over Dokdo. So those defense white paper is related with security questions. And that book began to mention about the sovereignty over Dokdo Island from 1976. But during the last 7 years, they are consecutively, every consecutive years they are mentioning about that. They put that Dokdo problem on the same level with the Northern Territories. They say it is that issue is not resolved and it is remaining as it is. So, well, the defense white paper is kind of a little bit different from the politicians' behaviors. The three lawmakers' entry to Korea, they tried that, is just something happened in the political arena. But white paper is issue and the stance of the Japanese government. So in that sense, we say that there would be a kind of a division of labor between the politicians and government. So the defense white paper is issued every year. It will come out like that even in the future. So we should be careful how to deal with that because it would continue every day like the textbooks. Another point is that this time Japan's cabinet approved the white papers right on the same day when those politicians tried to enter to Korea. And it means that Japanese government, currently the Gun cabinet, understands that we would not accept it, but they still they decide in the cabinet on the same day. It means that they don't care what the Koreans think. That reminds us about what happened in 3 or 4 months ago, when right after the 311 earthquake in Japan, we Koreans expressed our sympathies to Japanese, and we collected lots of donations to help them. On the end of the March 31st, they also issued the government statement, authorizing the middle school textbooks, which says about the sovereignty of Dokdo. At that point of time, we also said that Japan is indifferent to its neighbors' intentions or goodwills.
Okay. Anyways, Japanese lawmakers are trying to visit the Dokdo Island. The Japanese government is once again claiming that Dokdo is a part of their territory. Seems to me that a lot of Koreans are getting tired of hearing about Dokdo controversy. We like to put this Dokdo issue behind and move forward, but seems that Japan is becoming ever more aggressive with regard to this Dokdo issue. Why is this? What are their motivations?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that this issue is not really going to disappear. Whenever you have conflicting territorial claims, not only between Korea and Japan. I mean, let's just look at Japan. It has conflicting territorial claims over the northern territories with Russia. We have the Dokdo issue. And then, of course, the Senkaku, the Diaoyutai. They have this problem with China. If I were Japanese, I would be more worried about the Senkaku issue than Dokdo. I would be more worried about the Chinese, because now the Chinese are claiming the entire Okinawan island chains. So I think they have a bigger problem with Chinese than with South Korea. What is going on right now has more to do, I would argue, to do with the domestic politics than Korean-Japanese bilateral relations. The LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, does not hold the government. It's the Democratic Party, not the LDP. So the LDP is trying to, especially when things are not going well in Japan, the economy is really not picking up at all. They've had these terrible natural disasters. People are not happy, and they're looking to take advantage of the people's grievances by playing to their nationalistic sentiments, by presenting themselves as the nationalists and patriots, picking up on these issues, conflicting issues that might arouse their nationalism and patriotism, and hoping that they might return to government, the LDP. Yeah. By the way, it's not. They weren't trying to go to Dokdo. They were trying to go to Ulleungdo. Yeah, Ulleungdo this time around. So I wouldn't really pay too much attention to these people, because we've had that before, and we're going to have it again.
You're saying that the Japanese provocations are motivated by these domestic
political consumption. I would also argue that our response has domestic political consumption as well, and we have to wonder, is it what's best for national interest? Because things flare up and then it subsides. I think
that's the case, Professor Lee. A lot of people in Korea are saying that will there be any ways for both countries to put this behind once and for all and move forward?
No, of course not. Because in order for that to happen, either country, either South Korea or Japan, has to give up its territorial claim. I mean, which government, in its right mind, be able to do that, unless we put it to the International Court of Justice, which of course is what the Japanese have been claiming. But why should we do that when, for us, there's no issue in terms of the, to whom this island belongs? And besides, in the ICJ, we don't have a Korean national judge, where the Japanese does. So, unless that sort of thing happens, which is not going to happen, this issue is not going to be resolved. From South Korean point of view, I think we should take solace in the fact that we physically possess it. Japanese don't. Okay? Just think reversely. I mean, what would we think? How would we react if the Japanese security forces were there on the island? We would not take that very well. So I think that I think it's very important that be aware of the current situation, that we physically possess it. Japanese, they will continue to poke jabs, claiming it. They will do it next year, the year after. We'll just have to weather it. But we will not see the end of that.
I see. Let's move on to another event that sort of upset Koreans here. Another event was the U.S. decision to advise this international organization known as International Hydrographic Organization to continue to use the Seoul term, the Sea of Japan, to denote the body of water between Korea and Japan. Of course, the Korean government wants it to be denoted as the East Sea as well. So what was the significance of this U.S. decision?
Well, everyone know that in international politics, the United States has a decisive voice. So in that sense, the United States and England, both of them, submitted their suggestions using only the one name of Japan Sea should be very influential for the decision of the IHO. So, well, this is a question of foreign policy matters. So 3 years ago, United States, they once changed the Ryangkuru rocks to Takeshimas and then recovered to Ryangkuru rocks. So like that, we need to move along with the foreign policy lines, and then we need to discuss with the U.S. government how to change that, because if it is decided with one name, it'll take another long period of time to change that. So it was very critical question for us.
Is the U.S. most sympathetic toward the Japanese position with regard to the Dokdo issue?
Well, I think that not sympathetic. I think the United States is following the existing rules. Yeah, that's why we call it kind of a regime. So for the position of the United States, they are not much interested with which side takes the advantage. But the United States just to follow the customary rules, which is established under his influence long time ago. I think that's why the United States said that.
I see. Seems that despite the lingering historical ill feelings between the two countries, we can't deny that Japan is a very, very important country to Korea, both economically and diplomatically. So what would be the smart policy toward Japan at this stage?
Well, Japan also showed that their intentions to deepen the relationship between Japan and Korea. Even the Gun cabinet returned the historic books, which was in our archives. So Japan's government wants that, but as he said, because of Japan's domestic politics, doesn't allow it. So diplomatically, we need to separate the economic problems and those diplomatic problems to the Dokdo problems. So if possible, for mutual interest, we need to separate both things. But if we're too much involved with the emotions, that separation would not be possible. So while trying to persuade the Japanese and the Japanese government and trying to notice our sovereignty to the world communities, but still we need to cooperate with Japan. There are many things we have to help each other.
Somehow we should be able to separate the Dokdo issue from the ordinary diplomatic relationship between the two countries.
Yeah, as I said, that emotional response is most serious barriers between that cool, rational, policy makings. So,
Professor Lee, how would you evaluate South Korea's past responses to Japan so far this time?
Well, as Professor Choi pointed out, these are foreign policy arenas, so I think we have to pay a lot of attention as to how we conduct our foreign policy. If we feel that that the designation of the Eastern Sea as an Eastern Sea in international maps, then we have to put, not that our foreign ministry is not doing that, it is already doing that, but I think greater national effort has to be put into this effort to lobby the international organizations and specific governments like the U.S. and the U.K. I might just point out the effort that was put into, for example, the hosting of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. It's not just the sports committee that does this. Our president was at the forefront. Samsung, the Hanjin, Korean Air, all these major conglomerates, the entire nation was behind this effort to host the Winter Olympics, bringing it to Pyeongchang. And to everyone's surprise, we were able to do that. So if we feel that this is very important to name the Eastern Sea as Eastern Sea in all these maps, then I think that's the kind of effort that's needed to bring that about. Because the Japanese government has been very meticulous in lobbying the international community to designate the Eastern Sea as the Sea of Japan. Now, as far as the other areas, the Dokdo issue, this is not something that we can rely on anyone. It's our issue, and it's a bilateral issue, and we'll just have to contain it and deal with it. But there are other issues, such as the comfort women issue, which is another sore point. And this is not just a Japan-Korea issue. Comfort women issue is a universal issue. It's a gender issue. It's a human rights violations issue. And it's an embarrassment to the Japanese government and to the Japanese people that it's not dealing with this issue after all these years, and that there are only few remaining comfort women still living in Korea and elsewhere in Asia. So I think the South Korean government should make every effort in conjunction with the NGOs in Korea as well as in Japan and the international community, so that Japan will, in the end, face up to this terrible thing that they did, and make Japanese feel remorseful and embarrassed about its conducts, and deal with this issue, which will, I think, be extremely helpful in the emotional reconciliation between the two countries. So we have to put much greater efforts to bring these issues out, issues that can be handled at the international community level, but bilateral issues, we just deal with the Japanese and contain as much as we can.
Well, gentlemen, this is all for today's discussion. It was a pleasure to have you on, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.